Good morning, everyone. My name is Baylis. I'm the UK Sales Director for Cymulate. Probably up about half an hour of your time. We were told we weren't allowed to do a demo, so I'm afraid it is going to be death by PowerPoint a little bit. But I'll quickly demonstrate. You all right? What's this?
Yep.
Where's that going? Right, here.
Cross, yeah. And then just move that there. Sorry, apologies. Okay, test.
Any good?
No.
Any better?
Yeah.
Ooh, exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll quickly run through how Cymulate can help you prove that you're secure as opposed to just relying solely on hope. Sort of setting the scene. We've spoken to a lot of organisations, a lot of our existing customers as well as new prospects, as to what their top business challenges are. These are the top 5 things that we're seeing at the moment. So financial penalties from regulatory compliance. Someone asked a question earlier about PCI DSS, but we're also seeing GDPR. You've got NIS directive, the EU directive, looking at operators of essential services, CCPA, POPIA as well. Huge fines that are still being looked at. People still aren't necessarily compliant. You've got the whole compliance on paper, doing the self-assessments and things like that for various regulatory compliances. Still lots of organisations just compliant on paper is probably the way to put it. Rationalising your cyber spend. It's difficult to try and justify some of these, whether they're individual people, whether they're teams, whether it's individual platforms or products. Trying to justify and rationalise that cyber spend to the board, to the CFO, whoever it is that you need to go to in order to do that. And again, that's one of the big problems that we're seeing. Communicating cybersecurity effectiveness. So it's all well and good that you've now spent this money on all of these things, but how do you prove that it was value for money, that you are getting the return on investment that you were promised by that lovely vendor, and it's actually the right thing for your organisation. The efficacy of your immediate response plans. We all do tabletop exercises, we've all done various playbooks and things like that, but how do you actually prove that they're going to work? How do you prove that they're suitable and fit for purpose? In a previous role, I was working with a police force, I won't go into say who, and we did an exercise with them where they pulled out a folder off the wall for a threat, basically, and it was the threat was, or the incident, sorry, was a small aircraft crashing in a residential area, and it was basically our platform versus the process that they were currently using. And they opened up this folder, and the first thing was to phone this person, and they phoned that person, and they'd left about 3 years ago. And so it's like, it's a great process that you've got all these things in place, but unless you're testing them, unless you know that they're working, it's it's not great. And finally, the lack of sufficient resources. It could be budgets, could be time, could be personnel. Everything is being asked to do more with less at the moment. Now, with those business challenges, there are of course technical challenges as well. Been a lot of conversations this morning about vulnerabilities and patching and things like that. Now, just because your vulnerability manager tells you it's a high severity vulnerability doesn't necessarily mean that it's a high severity vulnerability for your organisation. You might have security controls in place that are already preventing or detecting that, but how do you know? You can't just be patching everything, sticking to 2-day SLAs for high vulnerabilities. Then looking at ransomware and new threats. Again, how do you know that you're able to protect against these emerging threats? Ensuring that your security controls are finely tuned. You've spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on these security controls, but are you able to manage their effectiveness? How can you prove that you're secure? Properly retiring tools without leaving any gaps. How do you know that getting rid of this product is going to be covered by the next product or a separate product that's been brought in to do it? Are there any gaps? Was there an overlap? Are you now missing anything? And of course, mapping everything back to frameworks. A lot of the organisations I'm working with at the moment are trying to map things to MITRE. Obviously, there are others out there. But again, it's another really good way of making sure that you mapping back to the frameworks, it covers off those specific techniques, specifically from a detection and prevention perspective. Now, This isn't my information. This came from the Thales 2022 data theft report. I'm not sure if anyone else has seen it. It's actually a really good report. I can send the link out if anyone's interested. I've just taken like 5 sort of highlights from some of the stats that they've shown, and some of them I think some of them you'll probably go, yep, absolutely agree with that. Others are quite shocking. So 43% of senior leaders reported an increase in attacks in the previous year. Yeah, we all know things are getting worse. 21% of all respondents said they had experienced a ransomware attack in the last 12 months. So it's 1 in 5, basically. 28% of senior leaders said they would not entrust their personal data with their own organisations. 50% of companies with an annual revenue greater than $1 billion, so not every organisation, said they don't have a formal ransomware plan. And 79% of companies remain concerned about the security risk of increasingly remote working. And that was one of the topics we had earlier today. So these were some of the bits that I thought were relevant for today's talks. Now, having looked at those business risks, looking at the technical risks, and obviously with the information from this report as well, it's looking about how we can then quantify those cyber risks. So you can look at running manual security assessments. They can take a long time to do. You need a lot of in-house skills to do them, or you can outsource it to a third party. That gets expensive, and ultimately it provides a point-in-time result. You can look at your incident response plannings. Again, need to be reviewed regularly. See previous story. They're resource intensive. Where am I? Sorry. Resource intensive. And again, how do you measure the actual return on investment of these? You can increase your pen testing, but again, as the previous presenters mentioned, you can only test what you know is there. Equally, it's costly, it's time consuming, and it's another point in time assessment. Regular patching and updates, okay, we all want to be doing that, but again, it's resource intensive, limited visibility, and how are you able to prioritise that? Now, once we have quantified those risks and we are starting to look at that element, you then need to start tracking them. And again, there's a whole series of things available to us in order to do that. Governance, risk, and compliance tools. Yep, but they're only as good as the data that you're putting in. Everyone's favourites, spreadsheets, manual entry, and very time-consuming, difficult to manage. The various security consoles, I'm sure that all of you have already got. There's no way to have that holistic visibility, and requires a lot of manual management and pulling that information together. And finally, scorecards are, again, only as good as the information that you're putting in. So what is the answer? What if you could know how you respond before you get attacked, use empiric evidence to better quantify risk, prioritise vulnerability patching based on attack paths, know your incident response plans and policies are effective, protect your organisation from attacks before they happen, understand the impact of change in your environment, monitor for security regression, and prevent security posture drift, and know your security controls are effective. Now, we've put all of those together and ultimately built this sort of five-pillar plan really for a security posture management program. Now, it needed to be easy to digest and easy to consume. It needs to be able to support the full kill chain. It needs to be based on evidence and risk scores. You need to be able to provide mitigation advice, and you need to be able to monitor for security regression. Now, with all of that sort of put together, we then come back to sort of the main element of my presentation, which is how do you know instead of hoping? So, hopefully, we all know that hope is a feeling of expectation and desire for a particular thing to happen, whereas knowing is being aware through observation, inquiry of information. So here's our little IT manager, and they might hope that Bob from accounts doesn't click on that link. They might hope that the pen testers don't find all their file servers. And they might hope that nothing happens so they can actually enjoy their weekend. When you bring Cymulate into the mix, you can say that I know that we're protected against the latest ransomwares. I know our customer data is secure, and I know where our security gaps are and how to remediate them. So how to know and how we do that is through simulating, evaluating, and remediating, and repeat. That's it. You run simulations within your environment, you evaluate the results, carry out the recommended remediations, and you repeat until that your security posture is at a risk level that you and your organisation are willing to accept. So what do I mean by simulate? Firstly, we'd actually simulate real-world attacks against your existing security controls. So whether that's things like your attack surface, looking at email gateways, web gateways, WAFs, endpoints, and DLP solutions. We assess everything in your environment and we establish a baseline. From there, you can only get better. There's hundreds of pre-built attack templates giving you access to individual executions, then allows you to create bespoke and reusable attack scenarios. New assessments and for sort of immediate threats, contractually, we have 24 hours to respond to a new threat. As soon as it's uncovered, it's in the wild, we'll have 24 hours to build an assessment for you to then test or assess your security controls to see if you're going to be impacted by it. Normally that happens between 6 and 8 hours. For Log4j, we had something within 4 hours. And finally, there's over 30,000 payloads. Now, this isn't a case of just running 1 or 2 attacks or a few tabletop exercises. To actually really test and assess your security controls, you need to be, you've got to have tens of thousands of assessments and payloads in order to do that effectively. How do we evaluate the results? It's not just us putting a finger in the air and going, yep, we're going to give you a 38 and you get a 42. It's all based on various frameworks. So we look at the NIST framework, CVSS, and Microsoft Dread. When evaluating a specific APT or attack group, we'll provide you a clear picture of the TTPs that have been used, as well as a visual representation of your detection and prevention capabilities. You get that sort of holistic view, so you can see your entire organisation's controls from a 50,000-foot view, and from there it's easy to see where the gaps are and what you need to focus on in terms of mitigation and remediation efforts. And finally, you're not alone. You're not going at it alone. You're not only joining a fast community of Cymulate customers, but you'll also have access to our customer success team, who are there to make sure you're getting the maximum out of the platform and any benefits that you can gain from it. And finally, remediation. There's no point shutting and locking your windows if you're going to leave your front door wide open, so we're going to show you what you need to focus on and what the priorities should be. When the CFO says to you, why do we need to spend this on that? You've got evidence to say, this is why, here's the risk, here's our gap, this is what we need to do about it. Exactly the same thing with the infrastructure teams. We need to carry out these changes on these security controls for these reasons. And being able to track your security posture over time, it shows the business exactly why you need that investment and how you're continuously improving. Now, how we do that, let me introduce you. I'm going to pull all that together. So this is Bob. Bob works in accounts. Somebody gave Bob a computer, and Bob receives emails from outside his organisation via an email gateway. Bob loves clicking on things. But how do we ensure that malicious emails can't get through to Bob's mailbox? What we do at Cymulate is we'd simulate an assessment or simulate an attack. So we would launch, first thing we do, is we'd use a similar device that Bob's using, and we'd create a dedicated mailbox, and we'd use that as our target. From there, we're going to send approximately 17,000 malicious emails at that new mailbox, and we're going to monitor what gets delivered. We can see out of that 17,000, about 9,000 emails actually get delivered to that mailbox. Now, that's not great, but there is some good news, and that's that the email gateway is already blocking 8,000 or so of them. Now, what we need to be able to do from there, excuse me, is actually review those reports and actually just go through that evaluation process. From there, we've been able to determine there's a whole bunch of file types that are being allowed through our email gateway, and we've got no business reasons, no justifications to allow them. So we now know that we can actually block those those file types at our email gateway by simply changing that email gateway policy, and then we can rerun that assessment. Now when we rerun the assessment after making that change, there are no emails or none of those malicious emails getting through to that mailbox, and all of them have been blocked at the email gateway. So now we know that when Bob gets his emails, he's fine to click away as he likes to do. There's nothing malicious there, and it's not just Bob. It's anybody else, any other user, any other business department or business or group that sits behind the same email gateway. Now we compare that with how do you hope? Just do that. It's easy. Anyone can do that. You might find you have people in your organisation saying, "Oh, I doubt we'll be targeted," or "I'm sure it won't happen to us." That is a response. You can do that. Now, obviously, there are some pros and cons to each of these. To hope, no changes needed. You don't need to, no configuration changes, and you don't need any additional hardware to hope. And there's no upfront cost to it either, which is really, really good. Lots of organisations prefer that method. Now, obviously, to know, it does take about 2 hours before you are going to see any real benefit. It is going to need access to a single device in your environment. And in my point, the only real con is there is a subscription fee for this as well. So to know, there is some cost involved. However, there might not be any upfront costs to hoping, but the likely costs are going to be things like ransoms, regulatory fines, irreparable reputational damage, as well as loss of productivity. So there are costs associated with just hoping as well. Now, I'm going to go through very quickly some of the common use cases of the Cymulate platform. My favourite one is the bake-off. Here we have our Director of IT, and they've been using Symantec as an EDR platform for years. They've never really had a problem with it. As far as they're aware, it does what they need it to do, and everything's fine. Then a new security architect starts, and they say, I've come from this other organisation, they're using CrowdStrike, it's fantastic, we should be using that, let's at least have a look at it. The CFO gets wind of this and says, well, hang on a minute, if we're changing our ADR platform, why not look at Microsoft Defender, because we've got an E5 license, and we get that as part of it, so let's at least throw that into the mix. How does the IT director then decide which platform do they go with? Now, what we would do is we'd install 3 identical machines with those individual platforms, and we'd launch the same assessments at each of them. Once those assessments are complete, a victor will emerge. However, for the sake of this presentation and anyone taking photos, thank you, everyone's a winner. Just remaining vendor agnostic. Ultimately, it gives you that ability and that power to see out of the box what's the best platform for your environment, or at least what's going to be the best fit at that time. And one more quick run through is lateral movement, everyone's favourite. Now, we all know Bob, we've met him before, we know he likes to click on things, but what would happen if Bob's device became compromised? What's the blast radius of that? What other devices can be reached? Is it just what devices in his department, in his VLAN, or maybe just his subnet? What we'll do is actually show you exactly how many devices could be compromised because of Bob and his clicking. Now we'll do that by actually moving laterally within the environment. This is all done in a completely safe manner. We're not exploiting any of the vulnerabilities that we detect along the way, and nor are we going to lock out any accounts. And we'll show you exactly how many devices can be compromised. Once we've done that, we can then start looking at things like where the crown jewels are. We'll show you where any application servers could be compromised and databases. We'll highlight the routes that we've taken from Bob's device all the way through to another device. We'll show you the exact spreading methods you're susceptible to and the attack methods that you're susceptible to. Now, once you've gone through that process and you've completed that assessment, you'll get the actual report. You can then start to review that information. Follow that mitigation and remediation advice so that when you rerun that same assessment on the same device, you'll see that there's the actual blast radius itself has been significantly reduced, basically, and now Bob and his clicking is going to have less of an impact on other areas of the business. Some other common use cases that I didn't have the opportunity to animate, I'm afraid. Continuous security validation, so assessing your control efficacy and protecting against immediate threats. Measuring your SOC and incident response teams and processes. Understanding that if your digital assets are exposed and what you need to do about it. Helping you make a more efficient vulnerability management process. Help you understand if an adversary can move between devices and network segments. help you understand that your security practices are robust and how robust. Help answer the questions that is your cloud environment safe and can it be breached? Show what cybersecurity risks you face by acquiring a new organisation or a new company, and give evidence to your cyber insurance provider that your premium should be reduced. Now, that's typically where I go and do a demo, but if anyone is interested in seeing the platform, we're going to be outside in the they've tucked away in a little corner. Come and see us. More than happy to go through and do a bit of a live demo as well. That's all I've got. If there's any questions on the floor, happy to take them. If not, we'll be outside.